Joining us now from Capitol Hill is the Republican representative from Oklahoma's 4th District and the GOP's Deputy Majority Whip, Tom Cole. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Alex, thanks for having me.
So, listen, my question, I am so happy to have you on this program because you've come out largely in support of what would seem to be sanity. And my question to you is, are the new kids on the block, which is to say Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, are they eventually going to capitulate to this sort of wisdom of the elders, if you will, or do you think they are going to succeed in this strategy?
Gosh, I hate to be an old guy already.
Well, I know no ageism implied at all.
Hey, I've been called a lot worse this last few days, so that's fine. No, seriously, look, I agree with what they're trying to do. They're just going about it the wrong way. I opposed, obviously, the creation of Obamacare. I voted multiple times to repeal it. We've actually modified it in some ways that eliminate regulations and some of the costs on a bipartisan basis. So we should keep up the fight. But shutting down the government is a suicidal political tactic. Eventually, it will be reopened, but the president will not have capitulated, and you will have discredited yourself. And along the way, you would have hurt the American people. A lot of workers furloughed. I mean, who's going to man veterans hospitals? Who's going to make sure that defense work gets done? Who's going to take care of Indian reservation health care and schools? I mean, those are federal responsibilities, and shutting down the government for a goal that you can't achieve that way is just counterproductive. What
do you think of the reporting that we're getting saying that Republicans intend on using the August recess to pressure reluctant lawmakers on this strategy? I mean, I guess as a Republican, how devastating, how destructive is this infighting for the party on whole?
Oh, I never mind debates. Look, I think that's part of what politics is about, and people advance ideas. And again, remember, this is different over tactics, not objectives. None of us are supportive of Obamacare, and in that sense, I think we take our eye off the ball. And if you adopt a strategy that can't work, and this one just simply will not work, you falsely raise the hope of your own supporters that it might succeed, and you're going to be pretty devastated when you fail. So again, this is just not a viable political strategy. It's an admirable goal, but it's we're not going to achieve it this way.
Setting aside whether or not defunding the Affordable Care Act is an admirable goal, because I think we do differ on that, Congressman.
I suspect we do.
In terms of political strategy, and you're saying you don't think this is sound political strategy, do you think that this strategy would work better during the debt ceiling debate? I mean, is this just a continuing resolution that you are opposed to, or is this idea of holding the government hostage, holding the American economy hostage, something that you oppose wholesale?
Well, look, I don't think it's a good idea to default on the debt. I don't think it's a good idea to shut down the government. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't use opportunities to change things. Look, we've been on an unsustainable debt march for quite some time. Republicans have done a lot to reverse that. The deficit's about half of what it was when the Republican House came into the majority in 2011. So we've moved in the right direction. We ought to congratulate ourselves from that, but we ought to continue to pressure it. Now, I think the big fight, the real leverage here for Republicans is sequester. That's a matter of law. That's something the president advocated for and signed. That's something the Democrats voted for in the Senate now seem to want to abandon without offering offsetting cuts in other areas, moving in really to the non-discretionary side of the budget. I think that's where the real fight will be. But again, at the end of the day, defaulting on our obligations or shutting down the government, to me, are not viable political options.
Congressman, I just want to open this up to our panel here in New York. And Jake, there's a lot of strategy or strategery, depending on your assessment of it, afoot here. Ted Cruz is saying that what he is suggesting is that the House pass a continuing resolution that funds the government except for Obamacare, and then basically kick that up to the Senate and make it look as if Democrats are resistant to the idea of passing a CR without the funding for the Affordable Care Act, which of course is settled law of the land, and somehow in that way implicate the Democrats in the government shutdown. And I really doubt that that works.
See, Alex, I don't think it's a question of whether it will work. I think this draws a bright line under what is wrong with Washington right now. The problem you have is that a significant faction of the Republicans in the House and a faction in the Senate do not accept the Democratic legitimacy of winning elections and passing bills as the last word. And then what the congressman said is exactly right. It's a question of tactics. If you go nuclear, you use every means at your disposal to oppose the other side. When you've lost, when a bill has been passed and signed into law, that is, to my mind, not a legitimate tactic. And you sort of can't do business with these people. I mean, it is like the right term is hostage-taking or terrorism. I mean, not killing people.
This is truly the nuclear option, Jennifer.
Yeah, and can I just point out, you've reached a very peculiar pass in American politics when Tom Coburn is the voice of reason in the Senate, when he's the one who's actually saying, I don't know, these tactics, they're a little excessive for my taste. I mean, that to me is what's so interesting. We're now at the point where I think that in about 5 years' time, we're going to be pining for the days of the moderate likes of Karl Rove.
Well, and look, Karl Rove is someone who has objected to this strategy.
Exactly.
I think what we also have to remember is that these are issues that involve real people. So it's not just an issue of will the tactic fail or not. It's how many Americans get crushed in the process.
Right.
So we're talking about 22% of Americans now saying they've been significantly harmed by the sequester compared to 6% in April. That's a substantial increase even just in the past few months. This isn't an abstract issue. This is about whether people are able to see a doctor when they're sick. I would say that if we were really going to let the political process play out, what we would do is see whether it's going to produce the gains that the Obama administration has said it will. There are already some indications in some states like New York that premiums are going to be down 50% here. Let it play out. If it's good policy and it works, support it. If, as it plays out as bad policy, Congress can always revisit legislation to make improvements.
You know, Congressman, I want to ask you about sort of the broader implications here, because from members of members of the party, whether on the sidelines or actually in Congress, there seems to be a will to say, to answer the criticism that Republicans are irascible obstructionists and to prove to the American public, no, that's not necessarily true. But I ask you, as someone who is on Capitol Hill, you have this strategy that's being launched by some of the stars of the Senate, the younger generation. And then you also have comments by Steve King about illegal immigrants and dreamers and commentary that many people think is racist and beyond irascible, but really simply unacceptable. Where do you see your party going at what seems to be a crossroads?
Well, frankly, I have a lot of optimism. We went through a tough election cycle, held the House. We hold 30 governorships. I don't have any doubt we're going to pick up Senate seats. It's on the margin as to whether we actually get control. So the idea, again, that we're somehow imploding or not moving forward is just simply not true. And I have to add, look, there are advisors to the president who've recommended that he shut down the government if the sequester isn't repealed. Now, that sequester was his suggestion, his idea. It's in law. And, you know, the House is actually appropriating to the legal appropriation specified in the sequester. So there's a lot of this on both sides. It's not somehow unique. There's just a lot at stake and a lot of intensity on each side to try and get it right.
Congressman, I would agree that there is some debate on the left over what policies should be pursued over earned benefit reform and so on and so forth. But if you look at schisms, public schisms, you have Heritage, you have the Club for Growth, you have Karl Rove on the opposite side of Republican leadership on Capitol Hill. That seems to be much more profoundly public and deeply divisive than any debate that's happening on the left.
Well, I actually think my friend Carl's probably on the side of the leadership, not on the other side. You know, again, when you lose an election, we lost the presidential election, although I always like to point out this president was reelected with a lower popular vote, lower electoral vote, smaller percentage of the vote. First time that's ever happened. So, and he was also not given the kind of congressional power he had in 09 and 010, where he basically got to run the Capitol Hill. He's got a Republican majority in the House and a blocking majority in the Senate. So, you know, again, we just need to sit down and engage constructively where we can, and there are areas we can do that. You know, we've passed 7 bills that have saved about $62 billion out of Obamacare, got rid of the 1040s, probably ought to focus on things like the medical device tax, which certainly isn't going to be popular. Howard Dean is in the paper on Friday telling us that the IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board, big component, isn't going to work. The administration's backed off their their business mandate. So this is a program that's collapsing. I think we ought to keep the pressure on it, but it'd be a mistake, again, to use a tactic that ultimately will not work. The president would not concede, and do it at the expense of the American people.